Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna. I'm a therapist and shamanic healer. And today I want to talk about the creativity of chaos. Crazy times these days. We're still in the middle of coronavirus, and George Floyd protests continue across the world. A lot of people are feeling really overwhelmed with fear, rage, uncertainty. This is a time of great change. And I know through my lifetime, there's been continual talk about a need for change on a systemic level, that the way we live is unsustainable, economically, environmentally, socially. I remember at the turn of the millennia in 2000, my boyfriend at the time was an electrician. He had to stay up all night on New Year's Eve because there was so much concern that everything would flip out with Y2K. Nothing happened. 2012, Nostradamus, the end of the Mayan calendar, prophesied end of the world. Nothing happened. But that doesn't mean great change isn't needed, and it doesn't mean it's not happening right now. I've felt since the coronavirus shutdown in March that this may be the catalyst for the change we're seeking, and I'm actually thrilled in the way it's come about, that the catalyst for change may be coming out of a disease rather than a war, that the economic and social issues are coming out of a place of compassion, that the policies that are in place are to protect the vulnerable, and that the protests for George Floyd are a massive call for social justice, a move away from brutality and violence, and a call for social change. So the hard thing about change is that lots of times things need to fall apart in order to be put back together in the right way. And the process is fraught with difficulty and possibly even danger. But there are some under-recognized principles that are always active that I find incredibly hopeful. The principles of synergy and emergence. And synergy is the idea that you have two separate things that when they come together, they create something that is greater or different than the sum of its parts. Emergence is the new thing that emerges out of the synergetic connection. So synergy, for example, is taking a hydrogen atom and two oxygen atoms, and you put them together and you get water. Hydrogen and oxygen have nothing to do with water individually, but when you put them together, you get a completely new molecule. You have a man and a woman. They aren't that different in many respects, but they are different in quite a few. And when you put them together in the right way, you get a baby. And a baby is not the sum of its parents' parts. I have two of them. They're incredibly different. Although they definitely have parts that are similar to me and to my ex-husband, my children are their own unique creations. In fact, if I only had one of them, I think I would want to either blame myself for what's wrong with them or take credit for what's right. And because I have two and they're so radically different, I know there's not a lot of credit that I can take because they were raised the same way and they're completely unique individual people. The massive response to the death of George Floyd is an emergent response. There have been so many Black people killed by police in different parts of the country, some much more directly and more violently. And I heard George Floyd's little 6-year-old daughter say, "Daddy changed the world." And he did. Where that change will take us remains to be seen. But the principle of emergence is incredibly hopeful. It's why I tend to not spend much time reading predictions and projections, because if we only look at the past to predict the future, if we only look at the material world and our limited understanding of it, without always holding the potential creative force that drives our evolution in every aspect of life, then our projections and our predictions are incredibly limited because we really can't predict the future. Humans tend to be very uncomfortable with the unknown, and yet at the same time we crave it. My favorite model for the process of change is a fourfold model. In the first stage of change, you realize there's a problem. In the second stage of change, you take some action to solve the problem. And the third stage is where things get interesting. The third stage is emptiness. It's after you've taken some action and stepped out of the old way of being, but the new way has not arrived or developed or presented itself yet. And the third stage is the trickiest part because it requires us to be in the unknown. And if we can stay in the unknown and even participate with it, that's where emergence happens. Now, sometimes it happens very fast, and sometimes it happens very slow. And in the discomfort of being in uncertainty, people often retreat back to what's familiar. They don't believe anything new can happen, and they go back to what they know. So they go back to stage 2, just trying to fix things, or they go back to stage 1 and in hopelessness. But there's a place that I've encountered in some of my shamanic practice known in some circles as the pregnant void. It's a place of pure potentiality, like the womb of the great mother from which all creation arises. And this is the place of emergence. Although emergence looks like magic or miracles, it's actually a principle. It's a fundamental, foundational principle of life. Seemingly different things are attracted to each other, and they create something new. Something never seen before, like a baby, like a water molecule, like worldwide protest for justice for a black man. So there's reason for hope, because if we can sit in the emptiness, in the chaos of stage 3, we will certainly be brought to stage 4. And I find that exciting and electric with possibility. We're being called to the next stage of our evolution. As a society and individually, we each have a part to play. We're like cells in a great body. And just like cells in a body, we each have a role to play. In our own gifts and talents and interests, whatever our unique configuration of broken and brilliance is, that's what we have to bring. And the more thoroughly and fully and honestly and powerfully we can bring it, it increases the health of the whole and the health of ourselves. We are not passive observers of life. We are co-creators. How we move through this stage 3 of emptiness and chaos has a lot to do with determining the outcome in stage 4. A lot of the ideas in this podcast are inspired by Daniel Schmachtenberger. He's a really brilliant researcher and visionary from a site called the Neurohacker Collective. I borrowed a couple of his metaphors because they were so good. And I'll put a link to the YouTube of his talk in the show notes. And another thing that Schmachtenberger talks about is what he calls allurement. I would call it the law of attraction. And it's really a driving force in synergy and emergence. It's a driving force in most of our lives. We follow the things that we're attracted to. And attraction or allurement is kind of a mystery. It's a mystery in its perfection, that we're often attracted to people who fit us like a lock and a key in lots of ways. All of the main partnerships in my life, both romantic and platonic, have offered things I could not bring to myself. And they've called me to grow in ways I would not have been willing or able to grow if it were not for those relationships. And that's part of the emergent experience. I'm an extrovert. I'm often drawn to introverts. I'm a creative, verbal systems thinker, magnetically drawn to linear thinking, mechanical-minded people. My best business partners are people who have attention to detail and are eager rule followers. Things I am absolutely not. But it makes a great partnership because there's a bigger skill set. And beyond that, something else can happen when these two seeming opposites come together to create something brand new. And the life force is infinitely creative. It's eagerly seeking these complex connections through this law of attraction and synergy and emergence. That is the evolutionary pull. It's the evolutionary process. It's incredibly, infinitely creative. So the possibility for positive creative change is incredible. It's always here. And that's the current of attraction, the current of love. And there's a lot of theories that say there's two energies in the universe, love and fear, constructive and destructive. And that's the danger in stage 3, in the process of change. It's very easy to get overwhelmed by fear. Now, fear certainly can drive us back into the attraction process. It happens all the time. But fear can also make us want to pull out of the evolutionary process, make us not be able to tolerate the unknown. It can feel too difficult to live in uncertainty, and we may be run by fear instead of love. It's one of the things that concerns me about the implications of the restrictions that have been imposed by coronavirus, is how easily people are willing to give up their rights for perceived safety. People do this in their jobs, in their relationships. Rather than taking the risk of stepping into the unknown, they stay in a dead marriage. They continue on in the job that they hate because it feels too risky to go into the unknown. And there may be a price to pay on the other end. They may die of a stroke or a heart attack much earlier than necessary because of undue stress and misery and the living death of an unfulfilling life. But that idea of 2 steps forward, 1 step back is an acceptable model of moving forward. And often things don't change until it's really, really uncomfortable or unbearable where we are. And actually, if we're lucky, it gets unbearable because then we'll actually make the change. I feel pretty lucky in that respect because I'm a very extreme person. And so I've got to crash into the wall more than once in my life. I crashed and burned with drugs and alcohol. I've crashed and burned with my finances and bankruptcy. I've been divorced twice. The first was certainly a crash and burn. The second one was more simple and elegant. The relationship had served its purpose, and it was time for it to move to a new place. And terrifying though that was, in the 2 years since that break, we are both so much more happy than we were together at the end. And things have unfolded and worked out in ways I never could have imagined. It's the happiest divorce ever. My kids are good, and my ex is good, and I'm killing it. But I got to a place where I didn't feel like I had a choice. That's what happened when I stopped using drugs and alcohol. I didn't feel like I had a choice. I filed bankruptcy because I didn't feel like I had a choice. So if we're lucky, we reach a place where we don't have a choice but to step into the unknown, when we can't go back. Well, we can, but the consequences are like death and destruction. And that may have to happen for us as a society before we move to a new place. But that's okay. It's a totally valid process. It makes everybody much more on board with change. But I love Schmachtenberger's vision of where we're going as a species. He's a scientist, but science and spirituality really can come to the same conclusions from different perspectives. And the idea that we are all parts of a great whole is not a novel idea. And the thing about a complex whole that has many parts is that it needs to be self-organizing. To go back to the metaphor of the individual in society being like a cell in a body, I love the idea that if you just took a lump of cells, like all the trillion cells that are in our body, and put them in a pile, they would mean nothing. But when they're organized in a particular way, they become a person. And society's like that too. But developmentally, we're still in a place where most of us believe we're separate. We don't really get the interconnected, interbeing, interdependence of all life. And as we evolve into that awareness, that reality, not just awareness, but like a felt experience of it, and I think more and more people are being called to that, then these principles of attraction and synergy and emergence can take on a whole new meaning, that there may be a self-organizing within humanity, and perhaps a new way, a new experience will emerge based on the understanding that the health of the individual serves the health of the whole, and that the individual understands that the health of the whole supports their own individual health, and they aren't separate things. And that when we serve our own highest good, we can bring that to serve the greater good. And that the greater good is a feedback loop that re-enhances, nourishes, and supports our own highest good. And we don't need to be afraid anymore. But for now, you can be afraid if you want. For me, I'm kind of hopeful, because my little corner of the world's pretty amazing. And I'm aware of the suffering. In fact, I've dedicated my life to alleviating suffering. And I do what I can. And that's exactly what each of us is supposed to do. I think the most important question we can ask every day is, what can I do? What's being called from me? How do I serve my own highest good, the highest good of those around me, and society as a whole? I don't need to change the world intentionally, but I might need to change the world unintentionally. Love or fear? Can I follow my passion, my joy? Can I bring my best self into the world? Doesn't have to be complicated. I cleaned houses for 12 years. It was good, honest work. I was bringing my best self into the world as a maid. Now I wrote a book. So what? I don't know if it's any better. It's just different. So I wish for you to follow your joy. Follow what you're attracted to. Seek what you love. And pay attention to synergy and emergence that might come out of that. And know that there's always reason to hope in the infinitely creative, abundantly generous universe of which we are a part. Blessings on your path. Until we meet again, this is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.